Having said that, we have no hard evidence on this point as yet. We are intending to pilot some work up here in Scotland to see whether there is any evidence that the reforms have led to higher levels of labour participation. It's also worth raising the question whether or not these financial losses arising from welfare reforms are being offset by increases in personal tax allowance. Well, there's something in this argument, I've got to say, but you do need to bear in mind that only a proportion of benefit claimants do pay income tax, but individuals in part-time, low-paid employment are often below tax thresholds. And if you're out of work on means-tested benefits, you're generally below tax thresholds as well. The increases in tax allowance also in quantitative terms have probably fallen some way short of offsetting the financial losses arising from welfare reform. If we make the assumption that the personal tax allowance is £1,500 a year higher than it perhaps otherwise would have been, that's worth about £300 a year to a sole earner or £600 a year for a double income household. By way of comparison, we're saying that the impact of the welfare reforms on a household with dependent children in Scotland is a financial loss a little bit over £1,500 a year. So there's something in the tax allowance argument, but it doesn't go the whole way by any means to offsetting the impact of the welfare. To conclude, it's clear from this evidence that some households are far more exposed to the downside of welfare reforms than others. In Scotland, as in the rest of Britain, pensioners and student households escape virtually unscathed. But on average, and I think that word average is important, families with dependent children are hit hard, and on average, lone parents and the disabled are hit especially hard. These financial losses, these large financial losses, are the result of the cumulative impact of the reforms. Looking at any one reform in isolation doesn't give you the full picture. Roll them all together and you begin to see the impacts are really quite large for certain sorts of households. Thank you very much, Chair.
As ever, Steve, thanks very much for a very comprehensive explanation of the research that you've done, and thank you very much for doing it for us. I think it paints a very disturbing picture. You said at the outset that you are now seen as the go-to people. Now, you certainly are go-to people in terms of the information that you're providing, and it's always created a lot of interest, and it's certainly given people who have got general concerns about the impact of welfare reform some real hard facts on which to base those concerns. But previously, it's my understanding that the DWP have also seen you as the go-to people. They've relied on you to provide information for them. But in this case, they have not been very supportive of your research. And in response to the publication of this report, they said that you had failed to take into account certain changes which they are in the process of introducing or have taken account of. Would you like to take the opportunity to respond to that criticism?
Well, look, what we've done in this report, as in the previous studies that we've done, is we've held all other factors constant. We're just looking at one bit of the world that's changing, which is the welfare reforms, and tried to trace through their particular impact in terms of financial losses. Now, I understand, and I've only heard this second-hand, I understand that what DWP have been saying is that you're not taking account of the fact that employment levels are increasing, and that therefore people coming, who are hit by the welfare reforms are fine. They're re-entering the labour market now. Yes, I can see that if the labour market is expanding, it's easier for people to move off benefit and into work. But this is an exercise in holding, in looking at one bit of the jigsaw. Now, whether or not employment is expanding because of the welfare reforms is a separate question. I mean, it's certainly the case that at the present point in time, there is some revival in the level of economic activity and employment going on. But I wouldn't necessarily attribute that to the reforms themselves. I think that DWP are hiding behind two events, behind an event which happens to be happening simultaneously with the welfare reform, and perhaps arguing, therefore, that we're overstating the downside of the welfare reforms. I mean, if the economy had gone in the other direction, they wouldn't have been able to deploy that argument.
Yeah, it's very possibly the case, given other statistics that we're aware of, that some of the people who would be impacted in one column or one particular assessment at the present time, even if they went into a position where they were no longer considered to be unemployed, would still be in receipt of benefits and would only move to another area in which they're going to lose out because there's so much part-time employment, zero-hour contracts. You know, the number of people who ostensibly have moved from being out of work to in work doesn't necessarily equate into a reduction in the number of people that are no longer dependent on benefits. Is that right?
Yeah, that's certainly the case. I mean, you may move from out of work benefits into receiving in work benefits. I mean, one of the big revisions that we've incorporated in the numbers that I've been presenting today is that the Treasury itself has recognised that some of the expectations that they first had about the financial savings arising from the welfare reforms didn't allow for the compensatory benefits which people might get. If they lost one set of benefits, they might end up claiming other benefits instead. And that's particularly why I think that their original figures on the financial savings arising from the incapacity benefit reforms have been so radically reduced. They're now much smaller because they're taking account of the fact that if you've had your incapacity benefit taken away, you may find then instead you're entitled for more housing benefit, etc., etc.
Another question in terms of the methodology that you used. You said that there were certainly two areas where you hadn't factored in because of council tax reduction and also the mitigation of the bedroom tax. They hadn't featured in your analysis here. But one concern that's been raised by some people, especially people in local authorities, is that although the increase in the availability of discretionary housing payment to those who have been impacted by the bedroom tax, the DHP has to be claimed, it has to be asked for by the recipient. So is it possible that for those who haven't claimed discretionary housing payment, that some of the statistics in here would actually be worse if those people were taken into consideration?
Yeah, if the take-up of discretionary housing payment is below 100%, then we're underestimating the impact of the reforms. I'm not close enough to the situation up here in Scotland to know whether you've got procedures in place that genuinely make sure that all the people that should be getting discretionary housing payment are getting it. I mean, I've spoken informally to one or two people who suggest that they've got the system in place, but whether or not it really is comprehensively in place, I'm a little unsure. But certainly it's the case that we've assumed that the full impact of the bedroom tax is being obviated, which it may not be.
It's a fair assumption. The money is there for everyone who's been identified, but the DHP has to be applied for, and there has been some anecdotal evidence that people are reluctant to claim it. So, and it might not be huge numbers, but there might be people who, for whatever reason, have decided not to claim it. And in that circumstance, that's the question I'm asking. Those people would actually be worse off because that hasn't been factored into some of these overall statistics.
Oh, absolutely, because we've taken out the impact of the bedroom tax from these estimates, and that's one of the reasons why Scotland looks marginally better than England in a number of the figures.